The millionaire lay perfectly still behind her desk, her breathing slow and even, her eyes barely shut. But everything about the scene was a lie, because tonight wasn't about rest. It was about catching a thief, and the only person she expected to walk through that door was a quiet janitor who had no idea he was about to be tested in a way that could change both their lives forever. Evelyn Carter had built her empire from nothing, rising from a cramped apartment and unpaid internships to owning one of the most influential tech companies in the country. And while the world admired her success, they had no idea how fragile it had become behind closed doors, because over the past 6 months, deals had been collapsing at the last minute. Confidential strategies were somehow reaching competitors before she could act, and investors who once trusted her instincts were beginning to hesitate, not openly, but just enough for her to feel it, like a slow leak in something once airtight. And the worst part was she couldn't trace it, not through her executives, not through her systems, not even through outside audits, which meant one thing she hated more than failure. Someone close to her was betraying her. Someone who smiled in meetings, shook her hand, and sat at her table while quietly dismantling everything she had built. And Evelyn wasn't the kind of woman who panicked. She adapted, she calculated, and most importantly, she observed, which is why she devised a plan that no consultant or board member would have suggested. Something simple, almost ridiculous on the surface, but brutally effective in its honesty. Because instead of chasing digital footprints or financial anomalies, she decided to test human behavior, to see what people did when they thought no one was watching. And that was how she ended up alone in her office long after everyone else had left, deliberately spreading out highly sensitive documents across her desk: acquisition blueprints, merger timelines, financial forecasts, the kind of information that could be sold for millions, and leaving her laptop open with access to internal systems that should never be exposed, then dimming the lights just enough to make the room feel quiet and unguarded before finally leaning back in her chair and closing her eyes, slowing her breathing, letting her body go limp, turning herself into the perfect illusion of vulnerability. Because if someone walked in and saw this, they would have a choice to make, and that choice would reveal everything. And the only person scheduled to come in that late was the night janitor, Marcus Reed, a man she barely knew beyond what she had observed in passing. He was consistent, always on time, never lingering, never talking more than necessary, pushing his cart through the halls with a quiet focus that most people overlooked. The kind of man executives didn't notice because he wasn't important to them. But Evelyn had learned long ago that the people others ignored often saw the most. And Marcus had been in that building every night for years, invisible yet present, cleaning offices where deals were whispered, where secrets were casually left out in conversations people assumed no one else heard. And if anyone had an opportunity to notice something, or to take advantage of it, it was him. But opportunity alone didn't make someone dangerous, temptation did. And tonight she was offering it on a silver platter, because if Marcus was involved in the leaks, or even if he was just another person willing to exploit an easy chance, this would be the moment it showed. And if he wasn't, if he walked away without touching anything, then maybe, just maybe, she could start ruling people out instead of suspecting everyone. But what Evelyn didn't anticipate was how tense the silence would feel as she waited, how every distant sound in the building seemed amplified, the hum of the air conditioning, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere far down the corridor, the occasional creak of the structure settling into the night, each second stretching longer than the last as she lay there pretending to sleep while her mind stayed sharp and alert, counting time, listening for the one sound that mattered, the soft squeak of wheels from a janitor's cart approaching her office door. And when it finally came, it was quieter than she expected, almost hesitant, like the person pushing it was already tired from a long night, the wheels stopping just outside, followed by a brief pause that made her pulse tighten despite her stillness. Then, the door opened slowly, carefully, as if whoever entered didn't want to disturb her, and she could sense him before she saw him. The faint shift in air, the presence of another person in the room, Marcus Reed stepping inside, unaware that the woman he believed to be asleep was watching everything through barely parted eyelids, measuring every movement, every decision, every second that followed. Because in that moment, without saying a word, without even knowing it, he was standing at the center of a test that would determine far more than either of them realized. Marcus Reed paused just inside the office, the quiet hum of the building wrapping around him as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Immediately noticing the woman asleep behind the desk and the documents spread out in front of her in a way that didn't feel accidental, because in all his time working nights, he had learned that people at her level didn't leave important things exposed like that, not unless something was off. And yet there it was, papers filled with numbers, contracts, and plans that even he could tell were worth more than anything he would earn in years, maybe even a lifetime. And for a moment he just stood there, unsure whether to move forward or quietly back out, because something about the scene felt wrong, like it had been set up, though he couldn't explain how or why. So instead he did what he always did. He pushed his cart further in and began working, slow and careful, wiping surfaces and keeping his movements quiet so he wouldn't wake her, but his attention kept drifting back to the desk, to the open laptop glowing faintly, to the papers that practically invited a second look, and despite himself, he stepped closer, his eyes scanning just enough to understand what he was seeing. Financial projections, timelines, confidential details that clearly weren't meant for public view. And in that moment, the weight of his own life pressed in on him. Unpaid bills, rent due, the constant pressure of raising his daughter alone and trying to give her a future he wasn't sure he could afford. And the thought came, quick and unwelcome but undeniable, that one small decision right now could change everything, that no one was watching, that it would be easy, just a photo, just a glance, just something to take the edge off the struggle he carried every day. And that was where the real tension lived, not in the room but inside him, because temptation didn't feel like wrongdoing at first, it felt like relief, like an answer to problems that never seemed to go away. But Marcus exhaled slowly and stepped back, pushing the thought away before it could grow into something worse, because he knew exactly what kind of line that was, and once crossed, it didn't uncross. And more than anything, he thought of his daughter, of the kind of example he wanted to set even when she wasn't there to see it. So he turned from the desk, ready to finish his work and leave everything exactly as he found it, when something small caught his attention, a faint blinking light on the laptop, subtle but persistent, and a slight flicker on the screen that didn't match the stillness of the room. And Marcus frowned, leaning in just enough to take a closer look without making noise, noticing a window open in the background, lines shifting in a way that didn't seem normal. And while he didn't fully understand what he was seeing, he understood enough to know it shouldn't be happening while she was asleep, which meant someone else might already be accessing it. And that thought changed everything, because now this wasn't about temptation anymore. It was about a problem unfolding right in front of him. And without hesitating, he reached out and partially closed the laptop, interrupting whatever process was running, his movements careful but decisive, then quickly scanned the room as if expecting something else to confirm his suspicion, his instincts sharpening as the situation turned from uncertain to urgent. And instead of walking away, instead of pretending he hadn't seen anything like most people probably would, Marcus pulled out his phone and headed toward the door, preparing to call security, his mind made up, because whatever was happening, it wasn't right, and he wasn't going to ignore it, not when he had the chance to do something. And as he reached the doorway, he glanced back once more at the sleeping figure behind the desk, unaware that she wasn't asleep at all, unaware that every choice he had just made was being silently witnessed. And in choosing to act instead of turning away, Marcus Reed stepped into a moment that would change far more than just that night. Marcus had just reached the doorway, phone in hand, when a calm voice behind him cut cleanly through the silence, stopping him mid-step. "You don't need to call them," Evelyn said, and when he turned, she was no longer asleep, sitting upright in her chair with a steady, observant expression that immediately made it clear she had seen everything, every hesitation, every decision, every moment he thought he was alone. And for a brief second, Marcus just stared, caught between confusion and the sudden realization that nothing about this situation had been what it seemed, his grip tightening slightly on his phone as he tried to piece it together. But Evelyn didn't give him long to wonder, because she stood slowly and stepped around the desk, her eyes never leaving him, not with suspicion, but with something closer to certainty, like she had just confirmed an answer she had been searching for far too long. And when she finally spoke again, her tone was different, less guarded, more human than the version of her most people in the building ever saw. "It was a test," she admitted plainly. gesturing lightly to the documents spread across the desk. And you just made a choice most people wouldn't have. And Marcus frowned slightly, still processing, because from his perspective, there hadn't been anything complicated about it. Just a situation that didn't feel right and a decision not to ignore it. But the way she was looking at him made it clear that to her, it had meant something far bigger. And before he could respond, the soft sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by security entering the room after receiving his partial call, their presence shifting the atmosphere instantly from quiet tension to controlled urgency. And within minutes, what Marcus had noticed was confirmed. There had been an active remote access attempt on Evelyn's system, one that had been in progress at the exact moment he stepped in. Someone from inside the company using elevated permissions to pull sensitive files without triggering the usual alerts, a method so precise it explained the months of unexplained leaks that had been quietly tearing her business apart. And if Marcus hadn't intervened when he did, if he had walked away or chosen differently, those files would have been gone without a trace. Just another invisible loss in a growing pattern that might have eventually destroyed everything she had built. And as security moved quickly to contain the breach and trace its source, Evelyn remained where she was, her attention still fixed on Marcus, as if the larger crisis unfolding around them had momentarily taken a back seat to the simple fact that he had done the one thing she had been hoping someone, anyone, would do. And after the immediate situation was under control, she finally asked the question that had been sitting behind everything. "Why didn't you just leave?" And Marcus, still holding his phone at his side, gave a small, almost tired shrug, his answer coming without hesitation or thought, "Because it needed to be handled," he said, simple and direct, as if there was nothing more to explain. And somehow that answer carried more weight than anything else that had happened that night, because it wasn't driven by reward or fear or even recognition. It was just who he was, and Evelyn saw that clearly now, more clearly than any background check or professional reference could have shown her. And in the days that followed, the truth unraveled quickly. The internal executive responsible for the leaks was identified and removed, the damage contained before it could spread further, and the company began to stabilize in ways it hadn't for months. But for Evelyn, the biggest shift wasn't in her business. It was in how she chose to move forward, because trust, once broken, wasn't easily rebuilt, and yet somehow, she had found it in the last place she expected, not in a boardroom or among her highest paid advisors, but in a man who cleaned the floors after everyone else had gone home. And so when she called Marcus into her office again, this time in the middle of the day with the full light of the city stretching out behind her, it wasn't for another test, it was for an offer, one that would change his life as much as his actions had changed hers. She offered him a position in corporate security, full training, a salary that would give him stability he had never had before, and a future that didn't require him to choose between time and survival. And Marcus, after a moment of quiet consideration, accepted not because of the money alone, but because it meant something more, being able to provide for his daughter without compromise. And as he left that office, no longer just the unnoticed janitor, but someone who had proven his worth in the most unexpected way, Evelyn watched him go with a quiet understanding that the test she had set out to conduct had given her something far more valuable than the answer she was looking for. It had reminded her that integrity doesn't come from position or power. It comes from the choices people make when they believe no one is watching, and sometimes, those choices are the very thing that saves you.